Okay, today we're going to talk about the Russian Revolution and how we went from the map on the top left, the green map of the Russian Empire in 1913, to the map on the bottom, which is the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union, as it comes to be known. In the span of a little over 10 years, this map transforms from a united empire under a czar to a union of Soviet Socialist Republics under a communist dictator. And we need to talk about what happened in this time, but really to get a better view of that, we've got to go back to about 100 years prior to the revolution and look at some of the causes. So, the Russian czars were autocrats, absolute rulers, and after the rule of Catherine the Great, who died in the last part of the 1790s, I believe, the power of the czar was unquestioned until the early 1800s, until specifically 1825. The ideas of the French Revolution stirred a few Russian thinkers to challenge the czars and the laws and customs that oppressed the lower class. The first of these challenges is what's known as the Decembrist Revolt. In December of 1825, after the death of Tsar Alexander I, a group of army officers with liberal ideas attempted to take power. The new Tsar was Nicholas I. He's actually the grandson of Catherine the Great, the son of Alexander I, who was instrumental in defeating Napoleon. The Decembrists, as the officers became known, hoped to gain power, establish a constitutional monarchy, and abolish serfdom. The revolt failed, leading Nicholas to suppress liberal and revolutionary ideas in Russia. So he does the first of what would be many crackdowns. Okay, the next big challenge to Russian absolutism is the disapproval of serfdom. Peasants formed the majority of the population in Russia. Many were free, but serfdom still existed. Serfs were not permitted to leave the land of their own free will. Serfs could not even marry without the consent of their landlord. Many peasants who were not serfs disapproved of this system. And the system, basically, Russia's the only country with this left. I mean, along with the United States and a few other slaveholding countries, most of the rest of the world has gotten rid of this type of labor, this coerced labor that was used. Okay, and so Russia is behind the times with serfdom. Most of the rest of the countries of Europe, all the rest of the countries of Europe, had abolished serfdom long ago. The next challenge is the Crimean War, and this is a war that was fought between the Russians and the Ottoman Turks over what is known as the Crimean Peninsula that sticks out into the middle of the Black Sea. The Turks also were allied with the French and English in this war, so it's kind of Russia against some of the other great powers. The Russian army was thought to be, invincible, but it turns out that they have inferior technology and railroads. They're very far behind in technology and the wherewithal to make war, as opposed to the British, the French, and even the Ottomans. The Russian population is humiliated by the defeat, and it begins to lose faith in its government. Okay, so what follows is the death of Nicholas I. He dies in 1855, and he is replaced by his son, Alexander II. Alexander is a liberal thinker. He abolished serfdom in 1861. People could no longer be sold. They could marry whom they wished, own property, and go into occupations and businesses. He also reduced the power of the nobility. He set up local assemblies called zemstvos with representation from nobles and peasants and townspeople. Alexander set up a judicial system based on an equality and trial by jury. He also required public education for elementary children. Unfortunately, his reforms still left peasants with very little economic success. Life for peasants was difficult with few economic opportunities. Okay, they begin this policy of Russification is kind of the next step down this road, and this is put in place by the son of Alexander II in response to Alexander II's assassination. Okay, this is his son, and he reacts very badly to his father's assassination. Alexander II was blown up in his own capital while out for a carriage ride. And his son saw this as a betrayal because here's a man who had liberalized and reformed, and this is how he was repaid. So by the late 1800s, Russia has a vast empire, we saw the map, containing many ethnic minorities. The Tsars maintained a tight control over minorities while promoting Russian unity. The policy of Russification was an attempt to make all groups within act and believe as Russians. Alexander III, the son of Alexander II, persecutes non-Russians. He insisted on one language, Russian, and one church, the Eastern Orthodox Church. He persecuted Jews, restricts their occupations and where they could live. These policies encouraged violent attacks on Jews called pogroms. The authorities stood by and watched as homes and businesses of Jews were destroyed. Okay, so here are our long-term causes. Okay, you've got absolute rulers. Alexander III, his son Nicholas II, sought to industrialize Russia with Western ideas. At the same time, they hoped to block the political reforms from the West. Both used harsh tactics such as secret police to suppress them. You have a string and a continuance of peasant unrest. In the early 1900s, a rigid class system still existed in Russia. Peasants are too poor to buy land. Many of them were angered by industrialization and being forced to leave the land to work in horrible conditions in factories. Urban workers join in on this. Factory workers worked long hours, received low pay, and put up with unsafe conditions. We've seen this elsewhere. It was among these workers that socialist ideas began to spread and gain in popularity. Just like in the rest of Europe, socialist ideas appeal very strongly to workers, and they want to move forward with this. And then you have our old friend nationalism. Okay, remember, Russia has suppressed all of these nationalities living within Russia, but many of these people hold on to their ethnic cultures. They disagree with the policies of Russification, and there were pockets of groups who wanted their own countries or states within the Russian Empire. So it kind of bubbles up for the first time in 1905. Russia fights a war against the Japanese in 1904, and they lose. And this triggers a crisis in Russia. On Sunday, January 2nd, 1905, peaceful marchers carrying a petition for reform were shot down by the Tsar's troops. Bloody Sunday, as it became known, destroyed the people's faith in the Tsar. Strikes and revolts exploded around the country. Okay, facing chaos, Nicholas makes some changes. So he is the new Tsar. Nicholas II is taken over for his father, Alexander III. He agreed to reforms, promises to grant more rights, such as freedom of speech. He agrees to set up a national legislature called the Duma. However, the Duma has little power and did little to relieve peasant and worker discontent, and pogroms still continued. World War I plays a huge factor in the Russian Revolution. We got a little taste of that when we were looking at Russia at World War I. Russia was one of the Allied powers during the war. With little industry, Russia's not prepared to fight the war. Supplies, food, weapons are not available. Soldiers lose faith in Nicholas II, the Tsar. And a lot of it is the Tsar decides to personally take control of the army, and he makes a royal mess in it. So you have even more reason to be disappointed in his rule. March 1917, there's a revolt in St. Petersburg. Rioters in the streets demanded bread. The Tsar's soldiers refused to fire on the people. Nicholas II abdicates, which means he gives up his rule in March of 1917. After the removal of Nicholas, the Duma officials set up a provisional or temporary government. The new government makes a mistake when it continues the war against Germany. This is an unpopular decision with the Russian people. Okay, and this leads to what was really the second Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. The ineffectiveness of the provisional government led revolutionary socialists to plot more changes. They set up Soviets, or councils of workers and soldiers in Russian cities. Soon the Soviets are taken over by a radical socialist party called the Bolsheviks. Following the revolution, an exiled Russian revolutionary, Vladimir Lenin, is returned home. And he's returned home very conveniently because what happens is that he makes a deal with the Germans who want the Russians out of the war, and they agree that they will send Lenin back to St. Petersburg to help him foment revolution if he agrees upon taking power that he will take Russia out of the war. Okay, Lenin, along with Leon Trotsky and many others, had a revolutionary socialist party called the Bolsheviks. They followed the ideas of Karl Marx, but they adapted it to Russia's situation. Lenin gains the support of many people by promising peace, land, and bread. The Bolsheviks promised to end Russia's involvement in the war. They also promised land reform and an end to food shortages. And in November 1917, the Bolsheviks led soldiers, sailors, and factory workers in an uprising that overthrows the provisional government. The Bolsheviks, now called communists, distributed land to the peasants, gave workers control of factories and mines. The communists, however, still face a struggle to maintain control in Russia. Okay, so this is basically the lead up and the actual act of the Russian Revolution. Over the coming days, we will talk about the events what happens after this. So make sure you've answered all the questions as part of the video, and then we'll talk to you later.